नारायण गोसाई महाराज श्री गुरुदेव की जय। नितिल विष्णु विष्णुपाद अष्टोत्तर शतनाम श्री भक्ति वेदांत वामन गोसाई महाराज की जय। नितिल विष्णु विष्णुपाद अष्टोत्तर शतनाम श्री भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्री प्रभुपाद की जय। नितिल विष्णु विष्णुपाद अष्टोत्तर शतनाम श्री भक्ति विज्ञान केशव गोसाई महाराज की जय। नितिल विष्णु विष्णुपाद अष्टोत्तर शतनाम श्री भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोसाई प्रभुपाद की जय। नितिल विश्व महाभागवत श्री गोस्वामी बाबूजी महाराज की जय। नितिल विश्व श्री सच्चिदानंद भक्ति विनोद ठाकुर की जय। नितिल विशिष्ट वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबूजी महाराज की जय। श्री रूप गौरिया गुरु वर्ग की जय। श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जीव गोपाल भट्टदास रघुनाथ शारद गोसाई प्रभु की जय। श्री स्वरूप दामोदर राय रामानंदारी श्री गौर पार्षद वृंद की जय। नाम जय श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरी गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौर मंडल ब्रज मंडल मथुर वृंदावन धाम की जय। सर्व अभिष्ट विदात गिरिराज महाराज की जय। श्री राधा कुंड श्यामा कुंड की जय। श्री यमुना देवी गंगा देवी की जय। श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय। श्री भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री पूर्णमासी योग माया की जय। श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जय। श्री हरि नाम संकीर्तन की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। समागत गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। Today's special day. No. Alright. Hari bol. Dandavat pranams Indira Mataji, Gargaraj ji, and Madhavi Didi. Dandavat pranams to all of you. Hari bol. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Radhikaya Priyatmane Shri Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Vedanta Narayaniti Namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Śrīmate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha. Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaya Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tarbhaktaya Namo Namaha. Yam Pravrajantam Anupetam Apeta Krityam Dvaipayana Viraha Katara Ajuha Putreti Tanmayataya Tarabobhinedu Stang Sarvabhuta Hridaya Munimanatosmi Narayanam Namaskritya Narang Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Shrinvatang Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridantasto Yabhadrani Vidhunoti Suhritsatam Nashta Prayeshvabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyutama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Tavaivasmi Najivami Tvaya Vina Iti Vigyaya Radhe Tvam Nayamam Charanantikam Bhaktya Vihina Aparada Lakshay Kshiptashtakama Ditarangamadhe Kripa Mai Tvam Sharanam Prapanna Vrinde Namaste Charanarvindam Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Dandavat pranams Pradyumna Prabhu. Okay. So, day before yesterday, we read Pṛthu's rule, reception of the Kumaras, and inquiries from them. Verses 1 to 6. Pṛthu's exemplary reception of the Kumaras. And then the rarity of your darshan. This is what he says. The rarity of your darshan. Fortunate and unfortunate householders. No need to ask about welfare of Atma Ramas like you, who are already totally fine and self-satisfied. But what will be the benefit for the suffering people? The Lord mercifully travels. Let's do the 16th verse. Actually, I didn't really like this translation here. Anyways, whatever. The Lord, who reveals himself to the world and who is always anxious to elevate the living entities, travels around in the form of self-realized souls like you to show mercy to his devotees. But yeah, the question. Therefore, I ask you, well-wishers, by what means will there be benefit for those suffering in this world? Okay, so this is what we read yesterday. Sanat-kumara answers Pṛthu's question in detail. Pṛthu's speech was meaningful, appropriate, concise, and sweet. Satisfied, Sanat-kumara smiled and replied as follows. I have been very nicely questioned by you, who are always thinking of the welfare of others. Although you know everything, you inquire because that is the behavior of a sadhu. Just as you desire our association, we desire yours. Discussions with questions and answers become conclusive in a congregation of devotees. Such meetings spread happiness for both the speaker and the audience. Link. Pṛthu asked what is beneficial for himself in verse 15 above. Now the Kumaras answer, you already have what is most beneficial. Attachment to the Lord's glorification cleanses lusty desires. You have already an inclination for glorifying the qualities of the Lord's lotus feet. Such fixed attachment is very rare and cleanses lusty desires from the heart, which are difficult to remove, like mineral dye. Now the Kumaras answer Pṛthu's question from verse 15. What is the benefit of everybody, all souls? The only cause of benefit for human society has been conclusively established in the scriptures as 1. Detachment from the bodily concept, and 2. Attachment, rati, to the Lord. Oops, I went way too far. Sorry. Okay. Right? What verse did we read to? Wait, actually, maybe I didn't go too far. We read... Oh, I didn't go too far. Okay. Now he's explaining Jnana Mishra Bhakti, with predominance of Bhakti culminating in Shantarati. Jnana Mishra Bhakti. Attachments to the Lord and detachment from the body can be developed by having faith, being inquisitive about the process of bhakti, applying bhakti yoga in life, worshipping the Lord or the topmost yogi, the devotee, regularly hearing and chanting the Lord's glories. That was in verse 22. Now verse 23 says, not associating with persons simply interested in sense gratification and money, not associating with associates of materialists, or not accepting their goals, being disgusted with the taste for sense enjoyment, being satisfied in the self,
molding one's life so that one cannot live in peace without drinking the nectar of the Lord's qualities. Now, verse 24, being nonviolent, following in the footsteps of great acharyas, remembering and tasting the sweetness of the excellent pastimes of the Lord, practicing niyam without material desires, not criticizing others and their methods of religion, simple and plain living, tolerating dualities. Now, verse 25, hearing gives attachment to the Lord and detachment from matter. Constant hearing of the Lord's qualities, which are like ornaments on the ears with increasing bhakti, develops one's detachment from matter and attachment to the Lord. So that's what we read up to. Now we're going to hear the result of attachment to the Lord. Let's just see this last verse. The devotee should gradually increase the culture of devotional service by constant hearing of the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These pastimes are like the ornamental decorations on the ears of devotees. By rendering devotional service and transcending the material qualities, one can easily be fixed in transcendence and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yadaratir brahmani naishtaki puman acharyavan jnana viragarang hasa tahatya viryam hridayam jiva kosham panchatmakam yonim ivotito gni. Upon becoming fixed in his attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead by the grace of the Spiritual Master, and by awakening knowledge and detachment, the living entity, situated within the heart of the body and covered by the 5 elements, burns up his material surroundings exactly as fire, arising from wood, burns the wood itself. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It is said that both the Jivatma, the individual soul, and the Paramatma live together within the heart. In the Vedic version, it is stated, Hridi Hyayam Atma. The soul and supersoul both live within the heart. The individual soul is liberated when it comes out of the material heart or cleanses the heart to make it spiritualized. The example given here is very appropriate. Yonim ivotito gni. Agni, or fire, comes out of wood, and by it, the wood is completely destroyed. Similarly, when a living entity increases his attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is to be considered like fire. A blazing fire is visible by its exhibition of heat and light. Similarly, when the living entity within the heart becomes enlightened with full spiritual knowledge and detached from the material world, he burns up his material covering of the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and sky, and becomes free from the 5 kinds of material attachments, namely ignorance, false egoism, attachment to the material world, envy, and absorption in material consciousness. That's avidya, asmita, rag, dvesh, abhinivesh. Therefore, panchatmakam, as mentioned in this verse, refers to either the 5 elements or the 5 coverings of material contamination. When these are all burned into ashes by the blazing fire of knowledge and detachment, one is fixed firmly in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unless one takes shelter of a bona fide spiritual master and advances one's attraction for Krishna by the spiritual master's instructions, the 5 coverings of the living entity cannot be uncovered from the material heart. The living entity is centered within the heart, and to take him away from the heart is to liberate them. Okay, this is the process. One must take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, and by his instruction, increase one's knowledge in devotional service. become detached from the material world, and thus become liberated. An advanced devotee, therefore, does not live within the material body, but within his spiritual body, just as a dry coconut lives detached from the coconut husk, even though within the husk. The pure devotee's body is therefore called Chinmaya Sharir, a spiritualized body. In other words, a devotee's body is not connected with material activities, and as such, a devotee is always liberated, Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14.26. Srila Rupa Goswami also confirms this. Ihayasya harer dasya karmana manasa gira nikila swapyavastasu jivan mukta sa uchate. Whatever his condition may be, one who is engaged fully with his body, mind, and speech and the service of the Lord is liberated, even within this body. 27. Dagdashayo mukta samastatar guno naivatmano bahirantar vichaste paratmano ryad vyavadhanam purastat swapne yata puruṣāstar vinashe. When a person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated from all material qualities, he transcends distinctions between actions executed externally and internally. At that time, the difference between the soul and the supersoul, which was existing before self-realization, is annihilated. When a dream is over, there is no longer a distinction between the dream and the dreamer. Purport. As described by Srila Rupa Goswami, Anya Bilashita Shunyam, one must be devoid of all material desires. When a person becomes devoid of all material desires, there is no longer need for speculative knowledge or fruitive activities. In that condition, it is to be understood that one is free from the material body. The example is already given above. A coconut which is dry is loosened from its outward husks. This is the stage of liberation. As said in Bhagavad Gita 2.10.6, Mukti, liberation, means sarupena vyavastiti, being situated in one's own constitutional position. All material desires are present as long as one is in the bodily concept of life. But when one realizes that he is an eternal servant of Krishna, his desires are no longer material. A devotee acts in this consciousness. In other words, when material desires in connection with the body are finished, one is actually liberated. When one is liberated from the material qualities, he does not do anything for his personal sense gratification. At that time, all activities performed by him are absolute. In the conditioned state, there are two kinds of activities. One acts on behalf of the body, and at the same time, he acts to become liberated. The devotee, when he is completely free from all material desires or all material qualities, transcends the duality of action for the body and soul. Then the body concept of life is completely over. The bodily concept of life is completely over. Therefore, Srila Rupa Goswami says, Ihayasya harer dasya karmana manasa gira nikila swapavastasu jivan mukta sa uchate. When one is completely fixed in the service of the Lord, he is a liberated person in any condition of life. He is called a jivan mukta, a liberated even within this body. In such a liberated condition, there is no distinctions between actions for sense gratifications and actions for liberation. When one is liberated from the desires of sense gratification, he has no longer to suffer the reactions of lamentation or illusion. Activities performed by the karmis and jnanis are subject to lamentation and illusion, but a self-realized liberated person acting only for the Supreme Personality of Godhead experiences none. This is the stage of oneness, or merging into the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This means that the individual soul, while keeping his individuality, no longer has separate interests. He is fully in the service of the Lord, and he has nothing to do for his personal sense gratification. Therefore, he sees only the Supreme Personality of Godhead and not himself. His personal interest completely perishes. When a person comes out of a dream, the dream vanishes. While dreaming, a person may consider himself a king and see the royal paraphernalia, his soldiers, etc. But when the dream is over, he does not see anything beyond himself. Similarly, a liberated person understands that he is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, acting in accordance with the desire of the Supreme Lord. And as such, there is no distinction between himself and the Supreme Lord, although both of them retain their individuality. Nityo nityanam, chetanas chetananam. This is the perfect conception of oneness in relation to the Supersoul and the Soul. Atmanam indriyartam cha param yad ubayorapi satyashaya upadhovai puman pashyati nanyada. When the soul exists for sense gratification, he creates different desires, and for that reason he becomes subjected to designations. But when one is in the transcendental position, he is no longer interested in anything except fulfilling the desires of the Lord. Purport: being covered by material desires, a spiritual soul is also considered to be covered by designations belonging to a particular type of body. Thus he considers himself an animal, man, demigod, bird, beast, etc. In so many ways he is influenced by false identification caused by false egotism, and being covered by illusory material desires. Being covered by illusory material desires, he distinguishes between matter and spirit. When one is devoid of such distinctions, there is no longer a difference between matter and spirit. At that time, the spirit is the only predominating factor. As long as one is covered by material desires, he thinks himself the master or the enjoyer. Thus he acts for sense gratification and becomes subjected to material pangs, happiness, and distress. But when one is freed from such a concept of life, he is no longer subjected to designations, and he envisions everything as spiritual in connection with the Supreme Lord. This is explained by Srila Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.2.255. Anasaktasya vishaya anyatarham upayunjata nirbandha krishna sambandhe yukta vairagyamuchyate. The liberated person has no attachment for anything material or for sense gratification. He understands that everything is connected with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and that everything should be engaged in the service of the Lord. Therefore, he does not give up anything. There is no question of renouncing anything because the Paramahamsa knows how to engage everything in the service of the Lord. Originally, everything is spiritual, nothing is material. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya 8.274, also it is explained that a Mahabhagavat, a highly advanced devotee, has no material vision. Stavara jangama deke, na deke tar murti, sarvatra hoy nija ishta deva spurti. Although he sees trees, mountains, and other living entities moving here and there, he sees all as the creation of the Supreme Lord, and with reference to the context, sees only the Creator and not the created. In other words, he no longer distinguishes between the created and the Creator. He sees only the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everything. He sees Krishna in everything and everything in Krishna. This is oneness. Stavara jangama deke, na deke tar murti, sarvatra hoy nija ishta deva spurti. Nimite sati sarvatra jala davapi purusha atmanascha parasyapi bhedam pashyati nanyada. Only because of different causes does a person see a difference between himself and others. just as one sees the reflection of a body appearing differently manifested on water, on oil, or in a mirror. Purport. The spirit soul is one, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is manifested in Svangsha and Vibhunangsha expansions. Svangsha means coming from his own body, like his own parts, and Vibhunangsha means separated. Vibhina means separate. So his personal manifestations and separate expansions. The jivas are Vibhunangsha expansions. The different incarnations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are Svangsha expansions. Thus, there are different potencies of the Supreme Lord, and there are different expansions of the different potencies. In this way, for different reasons, there are different expansions of the same one principle, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This understanding is real knowledge. But when the living entity is covered by the upadhi, or the designated body, he sees differences, exactly as one sees differences in reflections of oneself on water, on oil, or in a mirror. When something is reflected on the water, it appears to be moving. When it is reflected on ice, it appears to be fixed. When it is reflected on oil, it appears hazy. The subject is one, but under different conditions, it appears differently. When the qualifying factor is taken away, the whole appears to be one. In other words, when one comes to the Paramahamsa, or perfectional stage of life, by practicing Bhakti Yoga, he sees only Krishna everywhere. For him, there is no other objective. In conclusion, due to the different causes, the living entity is visible in different forms as an animal, human being, demigod, tree, etc. Actually, every living entity is the marginal potency of the Supreme Lord. In Bhagavad Gita 5.18, therefore, it is explained that one who actually sees the spirit soul does not distinguish between a learned Brahman and a dog, an elephant or a cow. Pandita Samadarshina. Pandita Samadarshina. One who is actually learned sees only the living entity, not the outward covering. Differentiation is therefore the result of different karma, or fruit of activities. And when we stop fruit of activities, turning them into acts of devotion, we can understand that we are not different from anyone else, regardless of the form. This is only possible in Krishna consciousness. In this movement, there are many different races of men from all parts of the world participating. But because they think of themselves as servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they do not differentiate between black and white, yellow and red. The Krishna consciousness movement is therefore the only means to make the living entities free from all designations. Indriyar vishaya krishta akshiptam dhyayatam mana chetanam harate buddhe stambhastoyam iva hradat. When one's mind and senses are attracted to sense objects for enjoyment, the mind becomes agitated. As a result of continually thinking of sense objects, one's real consciousness almost becomes lost, like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the big grass straws on its bank. Purport. In this verse, it is very nicely explained how our original Krishna consciousness becomes polluted, and we gradually become almost completely forgetful of our relationship with the Supreme Lord. In the previous verse, it is recommended that we should always keep in touch with the devotional service of the Lord, so that the blazing fire of devotional service can gradually burn into ashes material desires, and we can become liberated from the repetition of birth and death. This is also how we can indirectly keep our staunch faith in the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the mind is allowed to think of sense gratification continuously, it becomes the cause of our material bondage. If our mind is simply filled with sense gratification, even though we want Krishna consciousness, by continuous practice, we cannot forget the subject matter of sense gratification. If one takes up the sannyasa order of life but is not able to control the mind, he will think of objects of sense gratification, namely family, society, expensive house, etc. Even though he goes to the Himalayas or the forest, his mind will continue thinking of the objects of sense gratification. In this way, gradually one's intelligence will be affected. When intelligence is affected, one loses his original taste for Krishna consciousness. The example given here is very appropriate. If a big lake is covered all around by long kusha grass, just like columns, the waters dry up. Similarly, when the big columns of material desire increase, the clear water of consciousness is dried up. Therefore, these columns of kusha grass should be cut or thrown away from the very beginning. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has instructed that if from the very beginning we do not take care of unwanted grass in the paddy fields, the fertilizing agents or water will be used by them, and the paddy plants will dry up. The material desire for sense enjoyment is the cause of our fall down in this material world, and thus we suffer the threefold miseries of continuous birth, death, old age, and disease. However, if we turn our desires toward the transcendental loving service of the Lord, our desires become purified. We cannot kill desires. We have to purify them of different designations. That's an important point. We cannot kill desires. You can't just stop desiring things. We have to transform our desires. If we constantly think of being a member of a particular nation, society, or family, and continuously think about them, we become very strongly entangled in the conditioned life of birth and death. But if our desires are applied to the devotional service of the Lord, they become purified, and thus we become immediately freed from material contamination. Brashyatyanusmritaschitam jnana branksha smritikshaye tadrodam kavaya prahur atma panavam atmana. When one deviates from his original consciousness, he loses the capacity to remember his previous position or recognize his present one. When remembrance is lost, all knowledge acquired is based on When remembrance is lost, all knowledge acquired is based on a false foundation. When this occurs, learned scholars consider that the soul is lost. Purport. The living entity or the soul is ever existing and eternal. It cannot be lost, but learned scholars say that it is lost when actual knowledge is not working. That is the difference between animals and human beings. According to less intelligent philosophers, animals have no soul. But factually, animals have souls. Due to the animals' gross ignorance, however, it appears that they have lost their souls. Without the soul, a body cannot move. That is the difference between a living body and a dead body. When the soul is out of the body is called dead. The soul is said to be lost when there is no proper knowledge exhibited. Our original consciousness is Krishna consciousness, because we are part and parcel of Krishna. When this consciousness is misguided, and one is put in the material atmosphere, which pollutes the original consciousness, one thinks that he is a product of the material elements. Thus one loses his real remembrance of his position as part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, just as a man who sleeps forgets himself. In this way, when the activities of proper consciousness are checked, all the activities of the lost soul are performed on a false basis. At the present moment, human civilization is acting on a false platform of bodily identification. Therefore, it can be said that the people of the present age have lost their souls, and in this respect, they are no better than animals. Nata parataro loke pungsa svarta vyatikrama yad adhanyasya preyastvam atmanasva vyatikramat. There is no stronger obstruction to one's self-interest than thinking other subject matters to be more pleasing than one's self-realization. There is no stronger obstruction to one's self-interest than thinking other subject matters to be more pleasing than one's self-realization. Wow. Purport. Human life is especially meant for self-realization. Self refers to the super-self and the individual self, the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity. When, however, one becomes more interested in the body and bodily sense gratification, he creates for himself obstructions on the path of self-realization. By the influence of Maya, one becomes more interested in sense gratification, which is prohibited in this world for those interested in self-realization. Instead of becoming interested in sense gratification, one should divert his activities to satisfy the senses of the Supreme Soul. Anything performed contrary to this principle is certainly against one's self-interests. God, this is a difficult one. Okay. Artendriyartarta vidyanam sarvarta panavo nrinam brangshito jnana vijnanad yena vishati mukyatam. For human society, constantly thinking of how to earn money and apply it for sense gratification brings about the destruction of everyone's interest. When one becomes devoid of knowledge and devotional service, he enters into species of life like those of trees and stones. Purport. Jnana, or knowledge, means to understand one's constitutional position, and Vigyan refers to practical application of that knowledge in life. In the human form of life, one should come to the position of Gyan and Vigyan, but despite this great opportunity, if one does not develop knowledge and practical application of knowledge through the help of the spiritual master and the Shastras, in other words, if one misuses this opportunity, then in the next life he is sure to be born in a species of non-moving living entities. Non-moving living entities include hills, mountains, trees, plants, etc. This stage of life is called punyatam or mukyatam, namely making all activities zero. Philosophers who support stopping all activities are called shunyavadi. By nature's own way, our activities are to be gradually diverted to devotional service. But there are philosophers who, instead of purifying their activities, try to make everything zero, are void of all activities. This lack of activity is represented by the trees and the hills. This is a kind of punishment inflicted by the laws of nature. If we do not properly execute our mission of life and self-realization, nature's punishment will render us inactive by putting us in the form of trees and hills. Therefore, activities directed towards sense gratification are condemned herein. One who is constantly thinking of activities to earn money and gratify the senses is following a path which is suicidal. Factually, all human society is following this path. Some way or other, people are determined to earn money or get money by begging, borrowing, or stealing, and applying that for sense gratification. Such a civilization is the greatest obstacle on the path of self-realization. Na kuryat karhichit sangam tamasti brahmtitirishu dharmartha kama mokshanam yadatyanta vighatakam. Those who strongly desire to cross the ocean of nescience must not associate with the modes of ignorance, For hedonistic activities are like the greatest obstructions to realization of religious principles, economic development, regulated sense gratification, and at last liberation. Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Mokṣa. Those who strongly desire to cross over the ocean of nations must not associate with the modes of ignorance, for hedonistic activities are the greatest obstructions. Okay. Purport. The four principles of life allow one to live according to religious principles, to earn money according to one's position in society, to allow the senses to enjoy the sense objects according to regulations, and to progress along the path of liberation from this material attachment. As long as the body is there, it is not possible to become completely free from all these material interests. It is not, however, recommended that one act only for sense gratification and earn money for that purpose only, sacrificing all religious principles. At the present moment, human civilization does not care for religious principles. It is, however, greatly interested in economic development without religious principles. For instance, in a slaughterhouse, the butchers certainly get money easily, but such business is not based on religious principles. Similarly, there are many nightclubs for sense gratifications and brothels for sex. Sex, of course, is allowed in married life, but prostitution is prohibited because all of our activities are ultimately aimed at liberation, at freedom from the clutches of material existence. Similarly, although the government may license liquor shops, this does not mean that liquor shops should be opened unrestrictedly and illicit liquor smuggled. Licensing is meant for restricting. No one has to take a license for sugar. Wheat, or milk because there is no need to restrict these things. In other words, it is advised that one not act in a way that will obstruct the regular process of advancement in spiritual life and liberation. The Vedic process of sense gratification is therefore planned in such a way that one can economically develop and enjoy sense gratification and yet ultimately liberation. Vedic civilization offers us all knowledge in the Shastras, and if we live a regulated life under the direction of Shastras and Guru, all our material desires will be fulfilled. At the same time, we will be able to go forward Tatrapi moksha evarta atyanti katayeshyate traivargyorto yato nityam kritanta bhaya samyuta. Then again, economic development does not mean sense gratification. Everything should be adjusted in such a way things. Everything will be finished with death. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that death is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who ultimately takes everything acquired by the materialistic person. Foolishly, we do not care for this. Foolishly, we are not afraid of death, nor do we consider that death will take away everything acquired by the process of dharma, artha, and kama. By dharma, or pious activities, we may be elevated to the heavenly planets, But this does not mean that freedom from the clutches of birth, death, old age, and disease. The purport is that we sacrifice our interests in trivargya, religious principles, economic development, and sense gratification, but we cannot sacrifice the cause of liberation. Regarding liberation, it is stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Tattva deham punarjanma naiti. Liberation means that after giving up this body, one does not have to accept another material body. The impersonalists, to the impersonalists, liberation means merging in the sense of impersonal Brahman. But factually, this is not moksha, because one has to again fall down to this material world from that impersonal position. One should therefore seek the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in His devotional service. That is real liberation. The conclusion is that we should not stress pious activities, economic development, and sense gratification, but should concern ourselves with approaching Lord Vishnu in His spiritual planets, of which the topmost is Goloka Vrindavan, where Lord Krishna lives. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is the greatest gift for persons who are actually desiring liberation. What verse are we reading up to? 36. Okay, we're ending with this verse, 36. Vare vare chaye bhava. Oh, let me just check the internet's working because it's been wonky lately. Okay, it is still working. Great. Oh man. Thanks for sticking with me even when the internet's not so stable. Vare vare chaye bhava guna vyati karadanu na tesham vidyate kshemam isha vidvangshita shisham. We accept as different states of higher life, distinguishing them from lower states of life. But we should know that such distinctions exist only in relation to the interchange of the modes of material nature. Actually, these states of life have no existence, for all of them will be destroyed by the supreme control. Purport. In our material existence, we accept a higher form of life as a blessing and a lower form of life as a curse. This distinction of higher and lower only exists as long as the different material qualities, the gunas, interact. In other words, by our good activities we are elevated to the higher planetary systems or to a higher standard of life, good education, beautiful body, etc. These are the result of pious activities. Similarly, by impious activities, we remain illiterate, get ugly bodies, a poor standard of living, etc. But all these different states of life are under material nature through the interaction of the qualities of goodness, passion, and ignorance. However, all these qualities will cease to act at the time of the dissolution of the entire cosmic manifestation. The Lord therefore says in Bhagavad Gita 8.16, Abrahma punaloka punaravatirnarjuna mamupetyat punarjanna nividyate. Even though we elevate ourselves to the highest planetary system by the scientific advancement of knowledge or by the religious principles of life, great sacrifices and fruitive activities at the time of dissolution, at the time of dissolution, these higher planetary systems and life on them will be destroyed. Okay. Even though we elevate ourselves to the higher planetary system, at the time of dissolution, these higher planetary systems and life on them will be destroyed. Okay, got it. In this verse, the words Isha vidvangshita shisham indicate that all such blessings will be destroyed. Our bodies, either in this planet or in another planet, will be destroyed. And again we will have to remain millions of years in an unstate within the body of Mahavishnu. And again, when the creation is manifested, we have to take birth in different species of life and begin our activities. Therefore, we should not be satisfied simply by a promotion to the higher planetary systems. We should try to get out of the material cosmic manifestation and go to the spiritual world and take shelter at the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is our highest achievement. We should not be attracted by anything material, higher or lower, but should consider them all on the same level. Our real engagement should be in inquiring about the real purpose of life and rendering devotional service to the Lord. Thus, everything will be eternally blessed in our spiritual activities, full of knowledge and bliss. Regulated human civilization promotes dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. In human society, there must be religion. Without religion, human society is only animal society. Economic development and sense gratification must be based on religious principles. When religion, economic development, and sense gratification are adjusted, liberation from this material birth, death, old age, and disease is assured. In the present age of Kali, however, there is no question of religion and liberation. People have taken interest only in economic development and sense gratification. Therefore, despite sufficient economic development all over the world, dealings in human society have become almost animalistic. When everything becomes grossly animalistic, dissolution takes place. This dissolution is to be accepted as Isha Vidvangshitashisham. The Lord's so-called blessings of economic development and sense gratification will be conclusively dissolved by destruction. At the end of this Kali Yuga, the Lord will appear as the incarnation of Kalki, and his only business will be to kill all human beings on the surface of the globe. After that killing, another golden age will begin. We should therefore know that our material activities are just like childish play. Children may play on the beach, and the father will sit and watch this childish play, the construction of buildings with the sand, the construction of walls, and so many things. But finally, the father will ask the children to come home. Then everything is destroyed. Persons who are too much addicted to the childish activities of economic development and sense gratification are sometimes especially favored by the Lord when he destroys their construction of these things. It is said by the Lord, Yasyaham anugrinami harishye tad dhanam shanai. The Lord told Yudhishthira Maharaj that his special favor is shown to his devotee when he takes away all the devotee's material opulences. Generally, therefore, it is experienced that Vaishnavas are not very opulent in this material sense. When a Vaishnava, a pure devotee, tries to be material opulent and at the same time desires to serve the Supreme Lord, his devotional service is checked. The Lord, in order to show him a special favor, destroys his so-called economic and material opulences. Thus, the devotee, being frustrated in his repeated attempts at economic development, ultimately takes solid shelter under the lotus feet of the Lord. This kind of action may also be accepted as Isha Vidvangshitashisham, whereby the Lord destroys one's material opulences, but enriches one in spiritual understanding. Oh no, I don't want the Lord to destroy my material opulences. In the course of our preaching work, we sometimes see that materialistic persons come to us and offer their obeisances to take blessings, which means that they want more and more material opulences. If such material opulences are checked, such persons are no longer interested in offering obeisances to the devotees. Such materialistic persons are always concerned about their economic development. They offer obeisances to saintly persons or the Supreme Lord, and give something in charity for preaching work with the view that they will be rewarded with further economic development. However, when one is sincere in his devotional service, the Lord obliges the devotee to give up his material development and completely surrender unto him. Because the Lord does not give his blessings of material opulence to his devotee, People are afraid of worshipping Lord Vishnu because they see that the Vaishnavas who are worshippers of Lord Vishnu are poor in superficial material opulences. Such materialistic persons, however, get immense opportunity for economic development by worshipping Lord Shiva, for Lord Shiva is the husband of Goddess Durga, the proprietor of this universe. By the grace of Lord Shiva, a devotee gets the opportunity to be blessed by the goddess Durga. Ravan, for example, was a great worshipper and devotee of Lord Shiva, and in return he got all the blessings of Goddess Durga, so much so that his whole kingdom was constructed of golden buildings. In Brazil and this present age, huge quantities of gold have been found, and from historical references in the Puranas, we can guess safely that this was Ravan's kingdom. The kingdom was, however, destroyed by Lord Ramachandra. By studying such incidents, we can understand the full meaning of Isha Vidvangshita Shisham. The Lord does not bestow material blessings upon the devotees, for they may be entrapped again in this material world by continuous birth, death, old age, and disease. Due to materialistic opulences, persons like Ravan became puffed up for sense gratification. Ravan even dared kidnap Sita, who is both the wife of Lord Ramachandra and a goddess of fortune, thinking that he would be able to enjoy the pleasure potency of the Lord. By such action, Ravan became Vidvangshita, or ruined. In the present moment, human civilization is too much attached to economic development and sense gratification, and is therefore nearing the path of ruination. Alright, so tomorrow we will read, one second. Yeah, I was wondering that also. Brazil, what about Lanka? Maybe somehow Ravan's treasures from Lanka made it to Brazil. I don't know. Thanks, Krishna. Yeah, totally. Alright. I just got tired on the last two sentences. I don't know why. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. Jai Shishi Guru Gauranga Gandharvika Giridhari, Shishi Radha Vinod Bihari Ju ki Jai, Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatara Shatashmad Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Srila Gurudeva ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatara Shatashmad Srila Bhakti Vedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatara Shatashmad Srila Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmarjala Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Gosai Maharaj ki jai. Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmar Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashatarashatashmarjala Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada ki jai. Nitila Pravishta Maha Bhagavat Srila Gorksharas Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Nitila Pravishta Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur ki jai. Nitila Pravishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai. Shri Rupano Gauriya Guru Varga ki jai. Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Bhatta Das Raghunath Shara Gosai Prabhu ki jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda ki jai. नामचर श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरी गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौर मंडल ब्रज मंडल मथुरा वृंदावन धाम की जय। सर्व अभिष्ट प्रदाता गिरिराज महाराज की जय। श्री राधा कुंज श्याम कुंज की जय। श्री मुन देवी गंगा देवी की जय। श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय। श्री भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री पूर्णमासी योग माया की जय। श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जय। श्री हरि नाम संकीर्तन की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। समागत गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशवाश्च कृष्ण भक्ति प्रद देवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः। पंचकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। Dandavat pranams. So Pradyumna Prabhu is saying, where did you hear this though, Pradyumna Prabhu? I just like to know the source. I'm not saying I don't believe it, I'm just saying that, well, I don't like to believe anything until I know what the source is. He says that there is also a portal to Patal. Oops, wait, let me look at the previous lines. He said that gold was supplied to Lanka via the dimensional portals from Ahir Ravan's kingdom of the Aztec or ancient Mayans. Yeah, so let me know what your praman is, what the source of that is. Because it's not good to just, without any kind of source, not just to believe anything. We should first have faith in what the source is. And then, this is also the portal. Oops. Then he said, this is also the portal to Patalok, where Sri Ram was kidnapped and taken. Hanuman came and took Sri Ram and Lakshman back to the earth realm from here. This is said to be connected to the Bermuda Triangle. Yeah, so just let me know a bit more about the praman, and then I will know whether to believe it or not. Okay, Haribol. Dandavat pranams, and Tira Mataji, Manjari Didi, Pradyumna Prabhu, and everybody else. Jai Shri Radhe, Haribol, Madhavi Didi,